The space station was alive with activity. It was a hub where different species from across the galaxy came together to trade, talk, and explore. The air was filled with different languages, strange sounds, and even stranger sights. Some of the aliens that visited the station were huge, with scales that shimmered in the lights. Others were small and quick, with skin that changed color. But among them, one girl stood out, Zethra. She wasn't like the others. Zethra was an alien from a planet that no one on the station had ever heard of. She had smooth, pale blue skin, with eyes that glowed softly in the dark. Her appearance wasn't the problem. No, it was something else. It was the way she smelled. To everyone else, Zethra's scent was strange. It wasn't like the fresh air of the mountains or the clean scent of the ocean. Instead, it was a strong, earthy smell. It reminded people of moss and wet soil, mixed with something sharp and spicy. For the aliens who lived on the station, the scent was unbearable. They would wrinkle their noses and quickly move away whenever she passed by. Zethra could feel their eyes on her. Every time she tried to sit at a table in the cafeteria, people would leave. Some would even whisper, their voices just loud enough for her to hear. They would say things like, "Her scent is too much," or, "It's like she's from another world." Zethra tried to ignore it, but it hurt. She didn't choose to smell this way. It was just how she was. Her people were not known for being friendly with others. They kept to themselves, living far away from other species. Zethra had never known what it was like to be welcomed. She had always been an outsider. But here, on this space station, it felt even worse. Every day was a reminder that no one wanted to be near her. It was like she didn't belong. One day, as she sat by herself, picking at her food, a human soldier walked into the cafeteria. He was tall, with dark brown hair and a serious look on his face. Zethra watched him as he moved toward the counter. She didn't know him, but she could tell by the way he carried himself that he was a soldier. He had the look of someone who had seen many battles and had stories to tell. Zethra turned her gaze back to her food, not expecting anything to happen. But then, to her surprise, the soldier walked over to her table. He didn't look at her like the others did. He didn't wrinkle his nose or turn away. He simply sat down across from her. Zethra froze. She wasn't sure if she should say anything. She had never been good at talking to others, especially when they didn't want to be near her. But the soldier didn't seem bothered by her scent at all. He smiled at her, a warm, friendly smile. "You know," the soldier said, his voice calm and easy, "your scent is different, but I don't mind it." Zethra blinked in surprise. "You don't?" The soldier shook his head. "Nope. Actually, it reminds me of home." Zethra's eyes widened. "Home?" she asked, curious. "But why?" The soldier smiled again. "Where I come from, we have forests. The air smells like moss, wet earth, and the spices that grow there. It's the smell of nature. So yeah, your scent reminds me of that." Zethra was quiet for a moment, unsure of what to say. She had never thought of her scent that way. To her, it was just something that made everyone uncomfortable. But to this human, it felt familiar. It was strange to think that someone, somewhere, might find comfort in what she thought was a curse. "You're not bothered by it?" Zethra asked, still trying to understand. The soldier shook his head, again. "Not at all. I like it. Makes me feel like I'm not so far from home." Zethra looked down at her food, feeling a strange warmth spread through her. She had spent so long hiding from others, thinking that if she could just make herself smell like everyone else, they would accept her. But now, this human was telling her that her scent wasn't something to hide. It was something that reminded him of the place he loved. "Thank you," Zethra said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The soldier nodded. "Don't mention it. I'm Marcus. by the way?" "I'm Zethra," she replied, still unsure of how to feel. But for the first time since arriving on the station, she felt a little lighter. Maybe things didn't have to be the way they always were. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a place where she belonged. Marcus smiled. "Well, Zethra, I'll be here for a while. If you want to talk, I'll be around." Zethra watched him leave, the table a little stunned. She couldn't remember the last time someone had treated her with such kindness. As the minutes passed, she thought about what Marcus had said. Her scent reminded him of home. Maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all. For the first time, Zethra felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps with time, she wouldn't have to be alone. Perhaps she could finally find a place where she could be herself without the fear of being rejected. As the days went by, Zethra couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. He was different from the others. Unlike the other people on the space station who avoided her because of her scent, Marcus kept coming back to her. He would sit down across from her in the cafeteria, sharing stories of Earth. He talked about the forests there, the wide-open spaces, and the smells that reminded him of home. Zethra found herself listening more and more, fascinated by his words. She had never heard someone speak about the Earth with such warmth and love. To her, it was just another planet, far away, full of humans. But through Marcus's eyes, it seemed like a beautiful place, filled with nature and peace. At first, Zethra had been cautious. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. No one had ever wanted to talk to her without being uncomfortable. But Marcus was different. He wasn't bothered by her scent. He didn't look at her like she was some strange creature from another world. He treated her like a person, just like everyone else. As they spent more time together, Zethra started to feel a little less alone. For the first time since she arrived at the station, she began to look forward to seeing him each day. He would sit with her, talking about his life on Earth, about the simple things like the smell of rain or the feeling of the wind against your skin. And Zethra, in return, would tell him about her own world, the beautiful forests with trees that reached high into the sky, the vast oceans filled with strange creatures, and the stars that shone brighter than anything she had ever seen. She never thought anyone would care about her home, but Marcus listened with interest. He asked questions, showing that he truly wanted to understand. Slowly, a friendship began to grow between them. They would talk for hours, discussing everything from food to the stars. It was easy for Zethra to be around him, and for the first time. She felt like she was truly seen, not just the alien girl with the strange scent. One afternoon, after a long conversation about Earth's oceans, Marcus looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking." Zethra looked up, curious. "About what?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "About how everyone seems to avoid you because of your scent. It's not fair." Zethra lowered her gaze. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I'm used to it. I've been alone for most of my life." Marcus frowned. "That's not right. You shouldn't have to be alone just because of something you can't control. You're a person, Zethra. And I think you deserve to be treated with respect, just like anyone else." Zethra felt a strange warmth in her chest as she listened to him. She had always believed that her scent was something that would keep her isolated, that no one would ever accept her because of it. But Marcus was different. He wasn't trying to fix her or change her. He was simply accepting her for who she was. "I never thought anyone would feel that way," Zethra whispered. Marcus smiled. "Well, now you know. And I'm going to do my best to make sure you don't feel alone anymore." From that day forward, Marcus made it his mission to help Zethra feel more comfortable on the space station. He spoke to people, telling them about how Zethra's scent reminded him of his home and how it wasn't something to be feared. Slowly, the others started to warm up to her. It wasn't easy, and some people still avoided her, but little by little, the atmosphere around her started to change. One afternoon, Marcus invited Zethra to join him in the common area, where a group of humans and aliens were playing a game together. Zethra hesitated at first, but Marcus encouraged her. "Come on, it'll be fun. No one's going to judge you here." Zethra took a deep breath and followed him. To her surprise, the group welcomed her with smiles and laughter. No one mentioned her scent, and no one looked at her like she was different. They just treated her like one of them. It was a small thing, but for Zethra, it meant the world. She realized that maybe she didn't have to be alone forever. Maybe there were places and people who would accept her for who she was, even if she didn't fit into their expectations. As the days turned into weeks, Zethra and Marcus became closer. They spent more time together, sharing stories, laughs, and quiet moments. Zethra began to look forward to seeing him every day. He was more than just a friend. He was someone who made her feel like she belonged, someone who didn't see her, sent as a curse, but as something unique. One evening, as they watched the stars outside the space station window, Zethra turned to Marcus. "Thank you," she said softly. Marcus looked at her in surprise. "For what?" "For everything," she replied. "For sitting with me when no one else would. For showing me that maybe I don't have to hide who I am. I've never had a friend like you." Marcus smiled, his eyes warm. "And I've never had a friend like you, Zethra." They both sat in silence for a moment, looking out at the vastness of space. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter that night. For the first time in a long time, Zethra felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. And it was all because of Marcus, the human who saw her not as an alien, but as someone worth knowing. The weeks continued to pass, and with each one, Zethra's life on the station seemed to improve a little more. She wasn't alone anymore. Marcus spent more time with her, and she found herself growing more comfortable in his company. They laughed together, shared stories, and even played games. It was as though they had built a small world of their own, away from the stares and whispers of others. However, not everyone on the space station was as accepting as Marcus. As their friendship deepened, the tension around them began to grow. Some of the other humans on the station, particularly the ones in charge of security, started to notice Marcus's behavior. They didn't like the idea of him spending so much time with an alien, especially one with such an unusual scent. One day, Marcus was called into a meeting with his commanding officer, Captain Helson. The captain was a strict man, with deep wrinkles on his face that told stories of years spent in space. His eyes were sharp, and he never missed a detail. "Marcus," Captain Helson said, his voice serious, "I've noticed that you've been spending a lot of time with the alien girl, Zethra." Marcus nodded, his posture relaxed, but his mind alert. "Yes, sir. She's a friend of mine." The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. "I understand that you're trying to be kind, but you have to think about the bigger picture. We can't afford to have our people getting too close to her kind. She's an alien. And you know the history." Marcus felt a twinge of frustration. "I don't see what's wrong with spending time with her. She's not dangerous, Captain. She's just different." Captain Helson leaned forward, his hands on the table. "I know you're a good soldier, Marcus, but you need to understand the risks. Zethra's people are known for being unpredictable. And her scent, well, it's not something that's easily ignored. You've been seeing her more than anyone else. That's raising questions." Marcus's heart sank. He knew what the captain was getting at. The whispers, the rumors, he had heard them too. Some of the station's personnel were starting to question his judgment. They were worried about the impact of his relationship with Zethra. They saw her as a symbol of something dangerous, not as the person he had come to know. "I understand your concern, sir," Marcus said, trying to stay calm. "But I don't think we should judge someone based on their appearance or scent. She's not a threat. She's a person. Captain Helson didn't respond right away. He studied Marcus carefully before sighing. I respect your opinion, Marcus, but I need you to be careful. You're a soldier, not a diplomat. You need to focus on your duties. I don't want to see you get caught up in something that could cause trouble for you or the rest of the crew. Kokir nodded, though he didn't feel entirely satisfied with the conversation. It was clear that Captain Helson was worried, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on here than just concern for his safety. It was as if the captain and others on the station had already made up their minds about Zethra, and nothing Marcus said would change that. Later that evening, Marcus met with Zethra in their usual spot in the cafeteria. She was sitting by herself, her gaze focused on the window as she stared out into the vastness of space. Her delicate blue skin seemed to shimmer under the soft light, and her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the stars outside. She looked so peaceful, yet Marcus could see the subtle sadness in her expression. She had grown used to the whispers and the stares, but Marcus knew it still hurt. "Hey," Marcus greeted her, sitting down across from her as he always did. "How's your day been?" Zethra smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Same, as usual. People avoid me, but I'm getting used to it." Marcus didn't like hearing that. He knew she was strong, but the loneliness in her voice made his heart ache. He didn't want her to feel like that anymore. He wanted her to be accepted, to be seen for who she truly was. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice soft. "You don't deserve to be treated like that." Zethra shrugged, trying to play it off. "It's okay. I'm used to it. My people are never welcomed. I've always been alone." Marcus felt a surge of anger at that. He couldn't stand the idea that she had been living with that kind of pain for so long. She wasn't alone anymore, and he was going to make sure she knew. "That, you're not alone," Marcus said firmly. "I'm here, and I'll make sure others see you for who you are. You don't deserve to be treated like this, Zethra." Zethra looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also with fear. "What if they never accept me? What if things don't change?" "They will," Marcus said with a certainty that surprised even him. "I won't let them treat you like that. You're a person, Zethra. You have the right to be here, just like anyone else." The two sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Marcus didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. He would stand by Zethra no matter what. She was his friend, and he wasn't going to let anyone make her feel like she didn't belong. But the challenges were far from over. In the coming days, Marcus could sense that the tension on the station was building. People were starting to avoid him too, not just because of his friendship with Zethra, but because of the whispers that were growing louder. Some of the other soldiers were already beginning to question his loyalty. They were worried about his judgment, and they didn't like the idea of him being too close to someone they didn't trust. Marcus knew he was walking a fine line. The pressure was building, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep fighting for Zethra's place on the station. But he wasn't about to give up on her, not now, not after everything they had been through together. As the days passed, the divide between the humans and the alien races on the station seemed to widen. People started to avoid each other more, and the atmosphere grew tense. Marcus and Zethra could feel it. They were caught in the middle of something much bigger than they had imagined. But Marcus was determined to stay by Zethra's side. He wasn't going to let fear and prejudice tear apart the bond they had formed. No matter how much pressure he faced, he knew that what they had was worth fighting for. The pressure was starting to take its toll on Marcus and Zethra. The whispers that had once been behind their backs were now loud enough for them to hear. People avoided Marcus in the halls, giving him cold stares. The more he stood by Zethra, the more he became an outcast. It was clear that the tension on the space station was reaching a breaking point. One day, everything changed. The peaceful routine they had come to enjoy was shattered by an emergency alarm that echoed through the halls of the space station. Marcus was in the cafeteria with Zethra when the lights flickered and a loud siren blared. "What's happening?" Zethra asked, her voice filled with panic. Marcus stood up quickly. "I don't know, but we need to get to the command center." Without wasting any time, Marcus grabbed Zethra's hand and led her toward the nearest exit. The A hallway was crowded with people rushing to find safety. Panic was spreading like wildfire, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry to leave. But Marcus had a gut feeling something was wrong. This wasn't just a drill. As they reached the command center, Marcus saw a group of security officers gathered around, looking at a large screen that displayed a red alert. The captain was speaking urgently into his communicator. Marcus approached. "Him quickly. Captain, what's going on?" he asked, trying to make himself heard over the chaos. The captain looked grim. "We're under attack. A rogue faction from the outer planets has breached our defenses. They're after one thing: power. And they're not here to negotiate." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had heard rumors of rogue factions, groups that believed in the superiority of their own people and sought to destroy anyone they saw as a threat. He had never expected them to come to the station. But now, it seemed like a nightmare come true. "What do we do?" Marcus asked. "We prepare for battle," the captain said firmly. "Get to your stations. We need all hands on deck." As the captain gave his orders, Marcus turned to Zethra. She was standing there looking lost and scared. "Zethra, stay here. It's not safe. I'll protect you." But Zethra shook her head. "No, I want to help. I can't just stand here." Marcus didn't want her to get hurt. But there was something about the way she looked at him that made him realize there was no stopping her. She had always been strong, even when others treated her like an outsider. She wasn't going to hide away now. "Fine," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "But stick close to me. We'll do this together." The two of them made their way to the armory, where the soldiers were gearing up for battle. Zethra had never seen so many weapons before. The air was thick with the smell of metal and the sharp sounds of armor being adjusted. The soldiers were moving quickly, preparing for a fight they didn't want but couldn't avoid. As Marcus put on his armor, he kept an eye on Zethra. She was trying to stay calm, but he could see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't used to this kind of violence, and neither was he, but they had no choice now. Just as they were ready to leave the armory, an explosion rocked the station. The walls shook and the lights flickered again. Alarms blared even louder, and the sound of boots running down the hallway filled the air. "Let's move!" Marcus shouted, grabbing Zethra's hand again. He led her through the chaos, moving quickly toward the nearest exit. They were just steps away from the door when the sound of blaster fire echoed down the hallway. The attack had begun. Marcus's heart raced as they turned the corner, running straight into a group of the rogue faction soldiers. They wore dark, intimidating armor and carried weapons that glowed with a menacing light. Marcus raised his weapon, ready to fight, but the rogue soldiers were already moving toward them. It was clear they weren't here for negotiations. They were here to take control of the station, and they wouldn't stop until they did. "Stay behind me, Zethra!" Marcus shouted as he fired his weapon at one of the soldiers. The blast hit its target, sending the soldier stumbling back, but the others didn't hesitate. They fired back, their weapons lighting up the dark hallway. Zethra stood frozen, but Marcus quickly pulled her into a nearby room. The door slid shut behind them, giving them a moment of relief. "We need to get to the main control room," Marcus said, breathing heavily. "That's where we can stop them. It's the only way." Zethra nodded, her face pale. "Let's go." The two of them rushed down the hall, moving quickly and quietly to avoid being seen by the rogue soldiers. Every step felt like it could be their last. They had to get to the control room, or the station would fall. As they neared the control room, they encountered more soldiers. This time, Zethra stepped forward, her hands glowing with a strange energy. Marcus had never seen her use her powers like this before, but he didn't hesitate. He knew she could handle herself. With a fierce cry, Zethra released a burst of energy, knocking back the soldiers in front of them. Marcus fired his weapon, taking down another soldier. Together, they fought their way to the control room. When they finally reached the door, Marcus used his access code to open it. Inside, the control center was in chaos. The captain and several officers were trying to coordinate the defense, but they were overwhelmed. Marcus and Zethra quickly joined them. "We're here to help," Marcus said, his voice firm. The captain turned to them, his expression grim but relieved. "We need to stop the ship's engines from powering up," he said. "If they get control of the engines, we won't be able to escape." Zethra nodded, her mind focused. She had never faced anything like this before, but she wasn't afraid. She was ready to do whatever it took to save the station, and to protect Marcus. Together, they worked quickly, shutting down the systems that the rogue soldiers had taken over. It wasn't easy, but they fought through the chaos, their teamwork, keeping them strong. The fight was far from over. Marcus and Zethra had managed to stop the rogue faction from taking control of the station's engines, but their victory was only temporary. The enemy was relentless, and the battle raged on. The station's halls echoed with the sound of blaster fire and the heavy footsteps of soldiers rushing from one area to the next. Inside the control room, Marcus stood beside Zethra, both of them catching their breath after the intense battle. Sweat dripped down Marcus's forehead, his armor scratched and dented from the fight. Zethra, though, seemed oddly calm, her eyes steady as she monitored the control panels in front of her. She was no stranger to chaos, but this was something different. This was war. The captain and the officers worked quickly, trying to regain control of the station's systems. It wasn't just about survival anymore. The rogue faction was after power. Power to control not just the station, but the entire sector. If they succeeded, the entire galaxy could fall into their hands. Marcus knew they had to act fast. "Marcus," the captain said, his voice low, "we need you to lead a team to the communications hub. We can't stop them without sending out a signal to warn the rest of the galaxy." Marcus nodded, understanding the urgency. He turned to Zethra. "Stay here and help them. You're safer in the control room." But Zethra shook her head, her eyes fierce. "I'm not staying behind. I've been hiding my whole life. Not anymore." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but something in her expression made him pause. Zethra was no longer the shy, quiet girl who had been isolated because of her scent. She had become something more, someone strong, someone who knew her worth. "All right," he said softly, "but stay close. We stick together." With a nod, Zethra followed him as he led a small group of soldiers toward the communications hub. The station's corridors were quieter now, but the tension still hung in the air. They could hear the distant sounds of gunfire, but it seemed farther away now, as if the enemy was retreating or regrouping. Marcus wasn't sure which. As they reached the communications hub, they found the door barricaded. Marcus signaled for his team to get into position, and together, they broke down the door. Inside, a group of rogue soldiers was waiting for them, weapons drawn. Without hesitation, Marcus and his team opened fire, taking down several of the attackers. But Zethra wasn't just standing back. She stepped forward, her hands glowing with energy. With a determined cry, she released a wave of power, knocking the remaining soldiers off their feet. The room fell silent, and Marcus stared at Zethra in shock. He had known she was strong, but this was something else entirely. Zethra's powers were far greater than he had ever imagined. "Zethra, you can do that?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with awe. Zethra nodded, her expression serious. "I didn't know I could, but I've spent my whole life hiding from the people who fear me. I can't do that anymore. I need to use what I have." Marcus was silent for a moment. He had always known there was something special about her, but he hadn't realized the full extent of her abilities. Zethra was more than just a girl with a strange scent. She was a force to be reckoned with. The group quickly moved to the control panel. Zethra stepped forward and began working her way through the complex system, her hands moving with precision and confidence. The others stood back, watching in awe as she effortlessly accessed the controls. "We need to send out the signal," Marcus said, his voice low. "The galaxy needs to know what's happening here." Zethra nodded, her fingers flying over the console. "I'm doing it now." As she worked, Marcus looked around the room. The rogue soldiers they had defeated were scattered across the floor, and the rest of the station was still in chaos. But for the first time since the attack began, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. With Zethra by his side, he knew they had a chance. Suddenly, the console beeped, and Zethra looked up. "The signal is out. The galaxy will know what happened here." Marcus exhaled, relieved. But their mission wasn't over yet. The enemy was still out there, and they needed to secure the station before they could truly call it a victory. "Let's move," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We need to make sure they can't come back." The team quickly regrouped and made their way to the central command area, where the captain and his officers were preparing for the final push. The rogue faction had been beaten back, but Marcus knew they would try to make one last stand. When they arrived, the captain nodded at them. "Good work. We've regained control of most of the station, but we're not done yet. We need to secure the docking bays before they can escape." Marcus glanced at Zethra. "We're with you, Captain." The battle raged on for hours, but slowly, the tide turned. With the rogue faction's communications cut off and their escape routes blocked, they were left with nowhere to go. Finally, with the last of the attackers defeated, the space station fell silent. Marcus and Zethra stood in the middle of the command center, their breaths heavy from the long battle. Zethra was exhausted, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes. "We did it," Marcus said, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. Zethra nodded, but there was something else in her expression. Something deeper. "We did. But it's not just about today. It's about what comes next." Marcus looked at her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Zethra's eyes were steady, filled with a new sense of purpose. "We've shown them that we don't have to hide. I'm not going to hide anymore, and neither are you." Marcus didn't say anything at first, but as he looked at Zethra, he knew she was right. This was just the beginning. Together, they had fought for something more than just survival. They had fought for a future where everyone, no matter their scent, their appearance, or where they came from, could be accepted, and, for the first time, Marcus felt truly hopeful. With Zethra by his side, he knew that anything was possible. The battle was over, but the silence that followed felt heavy. The space station was safe once again, thanks to the courage of Marcus, Zethra, and the rest of the crew. The rogue faction had been defeated, and the signal sent out had warned the galaxy of the danger. Yet, despite the victory, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. They had won this battle, but there was still much to be done. As Marcus and Zethra stood in the command center, surrounded by the officers and soldiers who had fought alongside them, the captain approached them. His face was tired, but there was a look of respect in his eyes. "You did good, both of you," the captain said, his voice rough but sincere. "You've proven that even the most unlikely allies can make a difference. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to stop them." Marcus nodded, but he could see that Zethra wasn't smiling. She was standing a little apart from the others, her eyes distant, as if her mind was far away. "Zethra," Marcus said, walking toward her. "What's wrong?" Zethra turned to him, her expression soft but serious. "Nothing is wrong, but I'm thinking about what comes next." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've spent my entire life running, hiding from the fear and hate that others have for my kind," Zethra said quietly. "I always believed that my people were destined to be alone. But what if we don't have to be? What if we can change things?" Marcus looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. He knew exactly what she meant. After everything they had been through, after all the battles and the fear, Zethra wasn't just talking about survival anymore. She was talking about something bigger. She was talking about building a future where people like her, people who had always been rejected, could live freely, without fear. "I think you're right," Marcus said, his voice full of conviction. "We've already made a difference, but there's still so much we can do. We can help people see that it's not the way someone looks or smells that matters. It's who they are." Zethra smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Exactly. I'm not going to hide anymore, Marcus. I'm going to stand up for my people, and I'm going to make sure that we don't have to live in the shadows." Marcus felt a surge of pride. Zethra had always been strong, but now he saw something new in her. An unshakable resolve, a will to fight not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated like she had. It wasn't just her scent that made her special. It was her heart, her courage, and her belief that things could be better. "We'll do it together," Marcus said firmly. "You don't have to do it alone." Zethra looked at him, her eyes shining. "I never thought I'd have someone like you by my side." Marcus reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've always had me, and you always will." As the days passed, life on the space station began to return to normal. The crew was busy with repairs and getting the station fully operational again. But even though the immediate threat was over, the ripple effects of the battle were felt everywhere. The signal they had sent out had sparked conversations across the galaxy. Some people were fearful, others curious, but there were also those who were inspired by the bravery of Marcus, Zethra, and everyone who had fought to protect the station. Zethra was no longer the quiet, lonely alien girl she had once been. She had become a symbol of strength, of hope, and of the possibility of change. People who had once avoided her now approached her with respect, offering friendship and support. It wasn't easy, and there were still those who were suspicious or uncomfortable around her, but Zethra wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready to face whatever came next. One afternoon, Marcus and Zethra stood together on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The station had been repaired, and everything seemed peaceful again. But they both knew that the peace wouldn't last forever. There would always be challenges ahead, and there would always be people who couldn't see beyond the surface. Zethra turned to Marcus, her gaze thoughtful. "What do you think will happen now?" Marcus smiled, a quiet confidence in his voice. "I think the world is changing. People are starting to see that we're all more alike than we are different. And I think one day we'll see a galaxy where no one has to hide who they are." Zethra nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her. She had always believed that she was different, that she would always be an outsider. But now, with Marcus by her side and the promise of a better future, in her heart, she knew that she could be part of something greater. She could make a difference, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been judged or rejected. As they stood there watching the stars, Marcus spoke again. "You know, Zethra, you're sent. It's not so bad after all." Zethra laughed, softly, the sound light and free. "It's not so bad for you, huh?" "No," Marcus said with a grin. "It's the smell of home." Zethra smiled, her heart light. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. The future was uncertain, but with Marcus and the support of the people who had come to see her for who she truly was, Zethra knew that anything was possible. Together, they had fought for a better world, and now they would build it one step at a time.